Alright, welcome back to the third passage of SAT practice test number 2. As usual, I will give an in-depth demonstration of using the presence of information in the passage to discuss why an answer choice is absolutely correct, and use the absence of information in the passage to show why certain choices are incorrect. And today we're going to be approaching a double passage. It's the first double passage of I guess it's the only double passage of the test, but it's the first one we're going to do on this YouTube series. And I like to treat double passages in 3 steps. Okay, the first step is just reading passage 1 and doing strictly passage 1 questions. So let me write that down right now. So first is just reading passage 1 and also passage 1 questions. And then step 2 is going to be reading passage 2 and doing strictly passage 2 questions. And then the third part is going to be doing questions that relates to both passage 1 and passage 2. So I'm going to denote it by passage 1 question plus passage 2 questions. You'll see what I mean when we get into the actual questions and passages, but that's just the rough structure we're going to go with. Now with this modeling in mind, let's start with a scan of passage 1 to note the important locations where keywords and ideas appear, so we can find what we need later in the questions easier and faster, right? So passage 1 is adapted by Nicholas Carr. That's an interesting last name. Author Nicholas Carr. What is that title? The web shatters focus, rewires brains. Okay, that sounds kind of scary, to be honest. The second passage is from Steven Pinker, and that's why we're using pink today. Mind over mass media. New York Times. Great. Okay, passage 1. The mental consequences of our info crunching are not universally bad. So I guess it's going to talk about something good here. So certain cognitive skills are strengthened by our use of computers and net. Okay. Let's keep going real fast. Okay, so it's saying that these skills are being strengthened by our use of the computer and the net. Here's the research. Here's a study showing that playing video games will help people shift visual focus better. Okay, let's go into the second paragraph. It's likely that web browsing also strengthens. So there's another thing that's strengthening fast-paced problem solving. So this is a benefit of using the web, apparently, particularly when spotting patterns in data. What is this? British study. Medical information online. Assessing the worthiness. Okay, web page. So this here is a British study that is talking about just analyzing a bunch of women who, I don't know, search up WebMD or something and then just check if the page is worthy or not in a matter of seconds. That could actually be pretty useful. Let's keep going. But it would be a serious mistake to look narrowly at such benefits and conclude that the web is making us smarter. So I guess it's trying to say the web is not only making us smarter. There's some consequences here. The science article, okay, in a science article, let's see. Okay, so this person, Patricia Greenfield, Miss Greenfield, concluded that every medium develops some cognitive skills at the expense of others. So it's kind of like trading. You get better at problem-solving skills, but you get worse at reading skills or something. Let's actually underline expense of others. That could become useful, I think. Our growing use of the net and other screen-based technology, she wrote, led to wide range. So using the net has actually made us better at visual spatial skills, but that also means we have a weaker deep processing skill, and it could affect all of these things mentioned here. Let's go to the last paragraph, right? I think, yeah, last paragraph. We know that human brain is highly plastic. Highly plastic, what the heck? Neurons and synapse change. Okay, change and lesser change. So I see 2 changes already. Cultural use of new medium different. Okay, this is another idea of change. Kind of just means this last paragraph has a lot of stuff about changing your brain. Neuroplasticity. That just seems like you're mixing brain with that word of plastic right there. This is kind of strange. Well, that means our online habits continue to reverberate in the workings. Okay, scheming, ignoring the use for readings, deep thinking, so this is going down, and then scheming and multitasking is going up. It's a bad arrow. I'm trying to make it better. Alright, we'll just have to stick with that. So overall, let's summarize each paragraph. The last paragraph, I think the overwhelming theme is change. And it's about change of your brain. So I'm going to say change neuro. And then here, this paragraph is talking about the expense of others. When we develop certain cognitive skills, we're going to have some negative effects. So this is not all positive. There's some negatives of using the net, let's just say. Here, I want to say this paragraph, and to some degree this paragraph, I'm just going to do like something like this. That's going to talk about the pro. Bracket that off. So this is going to be the pro of net. And then just this sentence here is going to be a traditional hook and intro. So we got the parts of the passage nailed down, so we know where everything is kind of, and we got some keywords here and there. So let's look at the questions, shall we? The author of passage 1, great, passage 1, that's what we want, indicates which of the following about the use of screen-based technology. It should be thoroughly studied. So when I see the word studied, I want you to think about studies, right? Let's look at what the studies are, and does it mention anything about does the author mention anything about wanting to thoroughly study something? Well, screen-based technology. The study is one much-cited study. Here's a study about video game. This one it's just about video game. The author is just citing it. He didn't say anything like, "Oh, we should thoroughly study this." So none of that. Okay, let's see here. There's another study here. Yeah, British study. This study here again, just cited. Not really saying that we should thoroughly study every part of it, right? Okay, over here we have that science article, right? I would say that's also a study, but this one is not quite as good. Actually a little bit off topic, because this is more about just every medium in general and not just like screen-based medium, I suppose. But yeah, so let's just focus on the first 2 study, and none of them seem to suggest that the author wants to thoroughly study the use of screen-based technologies. He's just using them. And here's something we got to be really careful about on the SAT. One thing I like to note to people is you have to be really, really precise in how you read the text. The SAT it's not trying to trick you per se. It's just trying to test how you can remember and like correlate all the information. So if the author doesn't specifically say thoroughly study something, then you can't assume that that's what the author is going for. Okay, and that's why we have to cross A off, because there's no mentioning of the author actually wanting to thoroughly study the use of screen-based technologies. Okay, B. It makes the brain increasingly rigid. That's a terrible answer choice, because it's directly contradicted by much of the passage, but specifically I want to note the last paragraph. So we already noted that there's a lot of change, neuroplasticity, and over here, more change about, getting better at something, getting worse at something, different brain. All of this kind of change contradicts the idea of a brain being rigid. And rigid, as you know, is unchanging. So we already know that rigid is incorrect. But even worse, even worse, increasingly rigid. Now, to be increasingly rigid, we need something like the author saying, at first, Johnny's brain was very normal rigid, but after he played 5 hours of League of Legends, his brain became super rigid and he can't change his brain anymore. Now, something like that, yeah, I was a little bit extreme, but something like that never appeared in the passage, and thus we know that B cannot be a right answer. So let's cross that off. C, it has some positive effects. Yeah, actually, this was definitely explored, because we dedicated a whole bar to that. The positive effects, the pro of using the net, and the net here is associated with computers, and that's a screen-based technology, right? And all of this here, like the visual focus thing, the scanning website thing, and even in the introduction, we see that certain cognitive skills are strengthened by our use of screen-based technology, right? So this is a very, very perfect reinstatement. We got positive effects and screen-based technology displayed in like the first 2 sentences of the passage. We're gonna leave it open for now because we don't want to lock in something before we read all the options, right? D, it should be widely encouraged. Again, this is something that's similar to A, where this kind of idea may be suitable inside of a classroom environment, but on the SAT, we have to be really, really precise and very, very strict. Just pretend like you're a teacher grading the essay of a student that you hate, and you just want to mark everything wrong every chance you can get, right? And in this passage, there's no mentioning that the author never mentions anything about encouraging the use of screen-based technologies, and so we're just going to cross D off. That leaves C as the correct answer, just as we predicted earlier. So where did we find the answer to C? Because that could be useful for our number 23, which is a best evidence question, right? We found the answer to part 22 through the positive of the net, which is going to be from the introduction all the way down to pro of the net. And that's from number 1 to 22, I want to say. And while, of course, that's not going to be the only place that our answer might lie, but that's where I want to start off first, because if it lies in that region, then there's a much better chance that it's the one that we want, right? So from 1 to 22, lines 1 to 22, the only one that falls under that is choice A. So lines 3 and 4, let's go look at what that is. 3 and 4, certain cognitive skills are strengthened by our use of computers and the net. Actually, we just talked about this, I don't know, like 2 minutes ago, and this was a perfect reinstatement of part C. Let me elaborate on that a little bit. So what is the screen-based technology talking in this sentence? Well, the screen-based technology was computers and the net. That's what our screen-based technology is. And then what about cognitive skills strengthened? Is that in part C? In choice C? Yes. Positive effects. Is strengthening your cognitive skill a positive effect? I would like to argue that is the correct interpretation. So I am pretty sure that A is going to be the right answer, but we're going to leave it open, right? Let's look at B, 23 to 25. That falls outside our range, but let's see. but it would be a serious mistake to look narrowly at such benefits and conclude the web is making us smarter. I actually, to some degree, this actually contradicts our part C, right? Because this one is saying that the web might not be making us so smart, and choice C is saying that we are getting smarter. And does this relate strictly to thoroughly researched, increasingly rigid, or widely encouraged? Probably not in a strict setting, right? I think some people would like to argue that B and A go slightly together, because if you think that you need to notice more about like getting a wider view on if the web is making us smarter, then you want more thorough research. But the key here is the author doesn't even suggest we research anything. He just cites research. He's not saying that we should research this kind of stuff. He's just pulling it off the web or something, right? And then that's also not to say that there's already research in that field, right? There's actually 3 researches in this one passage. So that could even mean that it's already thoroughly studied, right? It's just a matter of incorporating it and looking at it. So that means B actually doesn't support A and is an incorrect option because it does not support C at all. So C, lines 25 to 29. Let's take a look at that. 25, 29, in a science article published. Yeah, so that's just one study, possibly trying to relate to A again, but we know that it doesn't support C, which was the correct answer to 22, and we're just going to cross it out. Very, very easy choice to get rid of. 29 to 31. 29 to 31. I think here, she concluded that every medium develops some cognitive skill at the expense of others. So this choice is supposed to relate to choice B, but the only relationship is that these are directly opposite, right? So this one is talking about rigid, and this line here is talking about developing something at the expense of another skill, and that suggests change. Because if you're spending something, you're using you're trading something for something else, that's changing your inventory, right? So D is incorrect. Whoa, what was that? Okay, D is incorrect, and the A is correct. 24. The author of passage 1 indicates that becoming adept at using the internet can, so A, make people complacent about their health. There was only one place that health was mentioned, and it was the British study. It talks about women searching up for the way women search for medical information, and how experienced ones can look at a website and decipher if it's trustworthy in a matter of seconds. And throughout this whole paragraph, there's never really an analysis on or just a statement of how the women feel about their health, right? It's just discussing their actions. It is not talking about their emotion about health at all, and thus, it is incorrect. And actually, complacent is actually not too common of a word, and even if you don't know what it means, you can still you can still cross A off, because there was no mentioning at all about how people felt about their health, and that was specifically targeting women as well. So there's nothing about people in general there either. That makes choice A a very, very poor choice. B, undermine the ability to think deeply. Yeah. Yes. So this was, I think I even underlined it. I think there was one in the last paragraph. Yeah, thinking deeply. It's a very, that kind of made an impact on me because it was the last few words, so I remembered it. But I also underlined it for safety, right? So on the SAT, if you see something that's that appeals to you, just underline it. You will get a better memory of that word too. So when you see it in the questions, you get a better sense of where it is. So don't feel bad about underlining too much, right? Let's see if it undermines though. We are ignoring those used for reading and thinking deeply. So yeah, we're ignoring. So we're leaving it behind. We're undermining it. We're undercutting it. We're saying that we don't really care about the ability to think when we are using the net, or like not necessarily that we're purposely undermining it, but just as a side effect, right? So B seems like a really good answer. It is supported by the last sentence of the passage. Okay, let's look at C. Increase people's social contacts. Okay, social contacts, while we associate that with technology a lot, social media and stuff like that, but just because your exposure to technology doesn't really mean you increase your social contacts, and the passage doesn't suggest anything like that at all. And C is gonna be wrong. But if you do want to do more social stuff, then you should probably subscribe to my YouTube channel, right? Just kidding. Well, you should still subscribe. Shameless promotion right there. D, improve people's self-confidence. Again, similar situation with C. The passage doesn't say anything of this sort, right? While of course you could go like, oh, I'm great at the internet, I'm so confident in my ability. Just unfortunately, the passage doesn't support this kind of statement, because there's just no mentioning of it, right? The absence of information. 25. Used in the line 40, plastic most nearly means, okay, probably not our traditional plastic. We know that human brain is highly plastic. Okay. Now, before we even look at the choices, I want to turn our attention to some of the nearby words, right? I want you to notice change. And these are like kind of rephrasing sentence, if you will. So on the SAT, it gives you hints as to what is the correct interpretation of a word, and when you see a semicolon, semicomma, it just means that the first part of the sentence is kind of similar to the second part of the sentence, and if the second part of the sentence is stressing change, then we know that part one of the sentence also has something to do with change. And let's look at the choices with that in mind. So creative, let's see. Okay, so the brain is highly creative. Creative doesn't have anything to do with the change over here, right? It feels a little bit off topic, to be honest. So we're gonna cross creative off, because the neurons and synapses are not creative, right? So the idea of change and plastic here is very different from creative. And of course, that just itself just doesn't really make sense, because a brain can't really be creative. B, artificial. Artificial. We know that the human brain is highly artificial. Now, I understand that artificial is associated with fake and people making something. So the word human here might trigger some kind of feeling of artificial, but I think the majority of us is not going to have that terrible association. There's nothing fake or artificial about the human brain. It's a very natural part of your body. So let's just cross it out. And artificial doesn't have anything to do with change either, so that fails. Malleable. Malleable is kind of a big word. So not everyone knows what malleable means. I'm going to explain what it means later, but let's just look at a pretty easy word, D, sculptural. So sculptural is like making sculpture, something that has to do with sculptures. So is a human brain highly sculptural? I don't think there's any idea of art here. Sculptural doesn't is a statue, and that doesn't really correspond to change. Our neurons and synapses structural, and our circumstances structural. This is just not the right usage of the word structural and sculptural, right? Sculptural, yeah, sculptural. Because there's nothing artsy, is that a word? Artsy about the human brain. So let's cross out D, and since we crossed out A, B, and D, just by process of elimination, then C should be correct. But let's look at what malleable means. Now, malleable is like a puddle of mud, and you can like shape it in whatever form you want. It's kind of like Play-Doh, and is malleable similar to change? Well, if something is highly malleable, just think of mud or Play-Doh, can change its shape pretty easily, yeah, right? You just punch it. I mean, that's kind of violent. You just poke it, and you can just influence the shape of it, right? So if a brain is highly malleable, that means as the circumstances change, you can adapt. Your brain can adapt. Okay, actually, adapt was a word here too, right? Adapt. You can adapt your brain, right? So that suggests a very malleable form of your brain, and that's what makes C correct, right? 26. The author of passage 2. Passage 2 is not the same thing as passage 1, just so you know. So we're going to go back to our outline here. So after we finish the passage 1 questions, reading passage 1 and passage 1 questions, we're going to move on to passage 2, part 2, which is reading passage 2, and then after doing that, we're going to analyze the questions of passage 2, right? Let's give it a go. Passage 2. Critics of this new media. What is this new media? We'll find out soon. Sometimes use science itself to press their case, citing research that shows how experience can change the brain. Now, this actually seems a lot like the previous passage's conclusion about all the change, and the previous passage that actually has some scientific research. So that gives me the idea that passage 2 is talking about passage 1. Okay, so passage 1, the author of passage 1 is acting as a critic of new media. So I'm just gonna make a rough note here. Now we don't know this solidly, right? But we have a rough idea of it. Okay, but cognitive neuroscientists roll their eyes at such talk. So this seems a bit disapproving of the critics of new media. Yes, every time we learn a fact, okay, there's changes. So he's saying that, yeah, the brain does change. There is an existence of neuroplasticity, which we talked about in the other passage, but the interpretation that whatever you do will completely reshape your brain like a blob of clay is a false interpretation. Okay, experience does not revamp the basic information capacity of the brain. So it's saying that the change is very limited. Speed reading programs have long to claim to do just that. Okay, so they have claimed to be able to do what experience cannot, which is to revamp basic information capacity of the brain. But the verdict rendered by so here's an example of it not working. He, after reading the whole book, only commented that it was about Russia. Genuine multitasking too. So here's another example of not changing your brain too much. So multitasking is a miss, and then it reminds the reader of SUV undulating. So that's like weaving between lanes as the driver talks on the cell phone. That actually reminds me of a scene in Doctor Strange. It's a great film. Anyways, moreover, the effects of experience are highly specific to the experiences themselves. So if you train someone to do one thing, they get better at that thing and nothing else. Okay, so better and nothing else. So music doesn't make you better at math, I agree. Conjugating Latin doesn't make you more logical, and then blah 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 blah. And it's like smart people don't try to make their brain better, they just immerse themselves in their field, read lots of books to be a good novelist, do lots of science to be a good scientist. Really, actually not that bizarre. Last paragraph. The effects of consuming electronic media has far limited than panic implies. Okay, so media critics in brain takes whatever form it consumes. You are what you eat. I think that's a great sentence to sum up what the media critics are trying to say. Alright, so here's an example, kind of like an analogy, saying that your brain doesn't turn into bullet points if you read bullet points, and just random tidbits like that to support his conclusion that the media critics have a false sense of logic, or have a false logic just in this specific case. Okay, so the last part is more of just a criticism of their view, so this in general. So I want to say criticism. Let's see there. Okay, you know what I wrote, right? Right here, this is just an example of how you could improve. So this is how you could. So this, I want to say success stories, maybe to some degree. So how to be smart? Yeah, do a lot of stuff in your field. Here is paragraph 2. This is to disprove some of the claims of some of the claims of critics of new medium. So this is something I want to say disprove, right? Talking about how speed reading programs don't actually revamp your brain and make you that much better at reading, and genuine multitasking is a fake as well. And paragraph 1 is just stating the author's opinion to some degree, so it's going to be an opinion intro, how he does not support the critics in new media, and is kind of saying that their view is not really well developed to some degree. Let's look at the questions now that we have a rough idea of the passage. So the author of passage 2 refers to the novel War and Peace primarily to suggest that Woody Allen. Okay, so the only place that War and Peace showed up was in the second paragraph over here. So War and Peace. Maybe I should highlight that and just make it. Oh wait, what? Make it stand out. Not really cooperating there, computer. Alright, so what is this trying to say about War and Peace? Trying to say, okay, so Woody Allen read War and Peace and only said it was about Russia. Not much to go on there. Did Woody Allen not like Toast? Oh shoot, he's a famous writer, I can't say his name. I would say Big T. And did not like Big T's writing style. Not mentioned in the paragraph, you know. It's very, very off topic. B, could not comprehend the novel by speed reading it. Okay, so just in my opinion, just by reading this sentence, it was about Russia. It's such a short sentence to describe such a long book that he probably didn't comprehend the book, right? But that's kind of like my subjective opinion, right? And we need concrete evidence. And as I said in the beginning of the video, we're going to look for direct information from the text. And we're going to do that right now. So, War and Peace. Let's move backward. It's talking about the verdict of Woody Allen, right? And there's a pivot word here. So whatever the but is a pivot word, and pivot word means the opposite, kind of like a different direction. Just think of that friend scene where you're trying to change the direction of the sofa, right? So here, whatever Woody Allen came up with is contrary in a different direction than what the speed reading programs are claiming to do. And just what the speed reading programs are claiming to do, well, let's go even further back. It's trying to claim what experience cannot do, and it's trying to revamp the information processing capacity of the brain. So it's trying to say that your reading information processing capabilities are better now. And Woody Allen's verdict is that's not true. And if your information processing abilities are not improved, and he is speed reading through a famous book, then there's good evidence that he couldn't comprehend the book just by speed reading, because speed reading does not work. That's what the passage is trying to say. It's saying that speed reading doesn't make you better at reading. You're just reading it really fast, and it doesn't guarantee that you're comprehending the book. So we're going to leave that open. Got some pretty good evidence there by using a backward flow logic. So C had become quite skilled at multitasking. Okay, multitasking came right after that. So I have genuine multitasking too. So what this suggests is that at first you have speed reading and Woody Allen, and then now you're adding genuine multitasking because of the keyword too. It's trying to say that before we're talking about something, and then there's something completely different, but that too has a similar case. It has two being shown as a myth. It does not work. The separation of Woody Allen and speed reading versus genuine multitasking shows us that Woody Allen didn't multitask during his speed reading program. Right? Maybe he does know how to speed read. Maybe he did try to multitask, but that's not relevant to how he was reading the War and Peace by speed reading it, right? So that's an off-topic response. D, regretted having read such a long novel. Okay, I know it says here a very famously long novel, and just in my humble opinion again, I think it could be that D is true. But let's go back and see if there's any evidence that Woody Allen says that he regrets it. And just by quickly looking at the only sentence that he appears in, we don't see any indication that he's regretted reading this book, right? So unlike choice B, D is an assumption that a lot of people would make, but is not backed up by the text. And we know that means the lack of information means that D is an incorrect answer. So let's cross it out and leave B as the correct answer. 27. According to the author of passage 2, what do novelists and scientists have in common? Okay, novelists and scientists, I remember that's in success stories. So success story, novelists read lots of novels and scientists read lots of science. Okay, let's go back. Okay, let's look at choice A. Okay, they take risk when they pursue knowledge. Pretty good. I mean, I think to some degree, most people will agree with that, but that's not supported by the passage. And as we've seen before in 26D and many other questions, the SAT often puts out stuff that seems an obvious choice for us. But what determines the correct answer is not how you subjectively feel. It's not about how you feel. It's about what the passage is saying. And if the passage doesn't, take risk at all in this paragraph, then in the paragraphs of success story, then there's absolutely no way that A is going to be correct. B, they're eager to improve their minds. Okay, so improve their minds, people often confuse that with, so people often confuse making your brain better and learning. So while success people, they do want to get better at doing something, they don't they don't do intellectual calisthenics. So what that means is they're not making their mind better when they're trying to learn. They're doing something else. They're not saying that to learn we don't really need to read books or anything like that. We just pump in some intellectual calisthenics so our brain gets bigger and better and stuff like that, right? It doesn't work like muscles. Okay, so B is incorrect because the passage didn't say anything. Well, the passage directly said that they're not trying to improve their brain. They're not trying to improve their mind when they're trying to learn. Okay, C. They're curious about other fields. We have another direct contradiction here. So lots of direct contradictions for number 27. And this one comes right here. So it's like immerse themselves in their field, right? So when they're trying to improve their learning capability, not their learning capability, their knowledge base, they're just immersing themselves in whatever they're trying to learn. Okay, so that means they're not trying to learn something else. Over here, there's an example of, you're not getting better at math by listening to music, and thus there's no statement that they're curious about other subjects. They're not interested in other subjects as far as their learning of their, career-based subject is, involved. So C is incorrect. Let's look at D. They become absorbed in their own fields. What a great reinstatement of what we just said. They immerse themselves in their field. Immerse and absorb. Such beautiful connection between these two words, such mirroring. And that connection, that similarity just makes D the perfect answer. Okay? They are trying to be absorbed in their field. They're immersed in it. They're surrounded by it. They're absorbed by it. Okay, 28. The analogy in the final sentence of passage 2 has primarily which effect? Okay, it uses ornate language to illustrate a difficult concept. Okay, so before we go back and look at what the final sentence of passage 2 was, we gotta know what ornate language is and if it's a difficult concept. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back and check. So what's the last sentence here? Okay, I think it says here, so as with ancient people who believe that eating, I think it's fierce animals make them fierce, they assume that watching, okay, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so that's just a really, really long analogy about you're not what you eat. You're not what you eat. Is that a difficult concept? Well, the author doesn't say that's a difficult concept. And for us test takers, the idea of a difficult concept is subjective, right? One question could be hard and the other could be not hard in your view, but in someone else's view, it could be completely different, right? And in this case, if the author didn't say anything about seeing it as a difficult concept, then we cannot assume that it's a difficult concept. So this part is already incorrect, as there's no reinstatement in the passage whatsoever. How about ornate language? Again, this ornate language thing, that's also quite based on you, I guess. Doesn't really apply. I don't see any way we know if there's ornate language here, and it seems this part here, difficult concept, is already false, then it's safe to assume that A is incorrect as well. Well, we don't actually have to assume, it's definitely wrong because part of it is incorrect. B, it employs humor to soften a severe opinion. Okay, so another one of those very subjective things. So severe opinion of human behavior. So does it have humor and does it have a severe opinion? Now, severe opinion, similarly to difficult concept, that was not discussed by the author. And we're just going to cross that out real fast. We can't really assume anything about the SAT, right? And then humor. Now, the SAT actually, quite surprisingly, they have their very special definition of humor, and we're not really going to go in depth that much in this video because we already know that B is incorrect. But humor on the SAT is when you're using something opposite of what it's trying to be. So instead of saying hide, you say run, and you use the word run to mean hide, and that's humor for the SAT because it's not the right way of using the word. And you're gonna see something like that, I think, on passage 1 of SAT practice test number 3, which we should get to quite soon. So just look forward to that, I guess. Okay, C. It alludes to the past to evoke a nostalgic response. Okay, nostalgic. What would trigger a nostalgic response? It's something that you did in the past, you remember it, you grow up, and something triggers you to remember that experience from your past, and it makes you kind of sad or emotional. Okay, now let's see. Is there anything from the past in this sentence? Well, yeah, ancient people. But the problem is, are you one of those ancient people? For us, I don't know, like test takers, 16, 17, maybe 15, 14 people, but basically teens, we're not ancient people. We're not going to be having experience this kind of behavior. You know, this is not part of our life. And therefore, it can't trigger a nostalgic response. Okay, it just can't. We didn't experience that. And the author can't assume that you have that experience, right? So that's what makes C incorrect. D. It criticizes the view of a particular group of people. Well, okay, I added people, but of a particular group. Okay, yeah, no duh. It's talking about those people who believe that, you know, eating fierce animals make them fierce, right? It's saying that this idea is quite ridiculous because if you look at another example of bullet points, does reading bullet points make your brain bullet point? I don't think so, and neither does the author. You know, so it's criticizing the view of those ancient people, and it's criticizing the view of the modern ancient people, which are the media critics. Okay, so it's saying that their view is incorrect because it makes no sense, as he demonstrated using his quick cuts and bullet point examples. So that makes D a really good answer. Perfectly supported. Okay, 29. The main purpose of each passage. Okay, so this is each passage, and what that tells me is we finished part 2 of our scheme, our trick to solving these kind of questions. We're on to steps 3, which is part 1 question and part 2 question. For this kind of part 3 question, we need to analyze both. Well, we have to refer to both passage 1 and passage 2 to see if there's correlation between the two passages and the answer choice itself, right? Okay, so let's go back. Whatever choice we find here, it has to be supported by both passages. So A, compare brain function those who play games on the internet and those who browse on it. Okay, some of this is definitely explored in the first passage, but because we're trying to see if a choice is exhibited by both passages, I think it's just clear to say, I think it's better just for us to note that which passage it doesn't appear in. Okay, so choice A, never appeared in part 2. Never appeared in passage 2. Nothing about games on that one. Okay, and that makes A wrong. Okay, report on problem-solving skills of individual with varying levels of internet experience. Never seen on passage 2. And sometimes seen on passage 1 a little bit, but nothing to the degree of varying levels of internet experience. There's no report on that, so B is incorrect. C, take a position on increasing financial support, not in either passage. Terrible choice. Not C. Okay, make an argument about the effects of electronic media use on the brain. Well, yeah, that is quite true. So in the first passage, it's talking about how I think just look at the last paragraph, right? Talking about online habits and how that's reverberating in our brain. So that's effects on our brain, right? And over here it's saying that talking about how cognitive. No, actually that's not an example. Talking about how the experience does not revamp basic information capacity of the brain, right? It's about his opinion about how electronics affect the brain. Passage 1 says, okay, huge change. Passage 2 says little change. Both are an argument, so that makes D correct. Okay. 30. Which choice best describes the relationship between the two passages? Okay, so passage 2 relates first-hand experience. There were no first-hand experience throughout passage 2, so we know already that A is wrong, but let's keep going to what it says about passage 1. Contrast with the clinical approach of passage 1. Now, clinical approach is similar to a study. It's like a research where you have to detail, your hypothesis and research and data and everything like that. And that, absent from passage 1. Sure, there was some research and study stated, but it was not really gone in depth, and that would make it not considered a clinical approach. So let's go to B. Passage 2 critiques the conclusions drawn from the research discussed in passage 1. Okay. Well, what are conclusions? Well, okay, first, are there research in passage 1? Yes. Are there conclusions in passage 1? Yeah. Well, let's look at what kind of conclusions there were. There were conclusions, there were conclusions about how brains can give you better, visual focus skills. That's from the video game study. Brains can give, using screens can give you, I don't know, better surf scanning skills, and concluding that there's a lot of change that goes on when you use screen devices. Okay, so that's the conclusion. Now let's see what passage 2 say. So passage 2 immediately says that critics of new media would use science, which is like citing research, similar to what we've seen in passage 1 about how experience can change your brain. So experience, well, is using a screen based technology and experience. Yeah. So in the very first paragraph, it's already talking about how his passage is gonna critique what critics of new media are using to state their opinion, to advance their argument, right? He's saying that neuroplasticity, which was described in extreme measures in passage 1, to be not so like flexible. Okay, so passage 2 does indeed critique on the ideas of change and how experiences can change the brain in passage 1. It does do that, so that makes B a good answer. Actually, let's just leave B open-ended for now, because I don't always feel so comfortable. I don't always feel so comfortable with just straight up choosing an answer. I like to cross things out, but I don't like to choose stuff straight away. Passage 2 takes a high-level view of a result that passage 1 examines in depth. Okay, high-level view and in depth. These are not something we could really classify here. We don't really know how high-level view passage 2 can be considered. Actually, passage 1 has gone quite deep into specific examples of, Woody Allen and how intellectual people, accomplished people, train their, academic rigor and stuff like that. So I don't think there's any kind of a high-level view, and also passage 1 and passage 2 stand on different sides, right? Passage 2 is saying that your brain does not change so easily, and passage 1 is saying it does change so easily. And that's, if they're on different sides, then that they can't be discussing the same result. Okay, so C is incorrect. Passage 2 predicts the negative reactions that discussions Okay, so it does not predict anything. Passage 2 does not predict anything whatsoever, much less negative reactions. Actually, passage 2 is more of a negative reaction to passage 1. It's not predicting what other people are saying. It's just talking about what passage 2 itself, what the author of passage 2 is feeling. And it's, mostly negative. So D is incorrect. So A, C, and D are incorrect. That makes B the correct answer. Okay, on which of the following points would the authors of both passages likely agree? Okay, so again, this is something that normally you think we're gonna have to read the author's mind, but no, we don't. We don't have to do that at all. So if the correct answer would be directly mentioned, or like something about it would be directly mentioned in both of the passage. So we'll see what I mean very soon. A. Computer savvy children tend to demonstrate better hand-eye coordination than their parents. So computer savvy children, so children were like not really discussed in the passage. Computer savvy and hand-eye coordination could be linked to maybe games in passage 1, but we know that does not appear in passage 2, and parents do not appear in either passage. So A has to be incorrect. Okay, so B. Those who criticize consumers of electronic media tend to overreact in their criticism. Okay, I think this is something that passage 2 would definitely agree with. And it's saying that, the critics of new media are saying that neuroplasticity is gonna change your brain in a really revolutionary way, while it wouldn't do that. Okay, so that's what makes B incorrect. Okay. Oh, actually, well, that's what passage 2 is doing. Passage 1 doesn't say anything like that. Actually, passage 2 is taking the opposite stand of passage 1, and thus we know for sure that passage 1 does not overreact at all. Actually, passage 1 supports the idea that electronic media will change your brain drastically. It doesn't think it's overreacting. Okay, so C. Improved visual spatial skills do not generalize to improve skills in other areas. Okay, this is something that was discussed in both passages. So in passage 1, we see over here that there's an increased visual skill here discussing passage 1 in paragraph 1 and also paragraph 2. But later on, the passage says that it's just not only making us smarter, and there's also negative consequences here, where at the expense of others, where developing visual skills is at the expense of other skills, right? So that's passage 1. How about passage 2? Does it have a similar case? Well, yeah, it's talking about something like, let me find it real fast. Say, okay, if you train people to do one thing, they get better at that thing, but almost nothing else. Recognize shape. That sounds like visual stuff to me. Again, a perfect reading statement, part C, choice C. So in this case, when you see it in both passages, then you know that this choice is going to be the correct choice. D. Internet users are unlikely to prefer. Okay, not mentioned in either passage. So we could easily cross that one out. Okay, on to the very, very last question. Okay, let's get through this. I know it's been quite a long video, but there was just a lot of stuff to explain and do. Which choice provides the best evidence that the author of passage 2 would agree to some extent that the claim attributed to Michael Merzenich in lines 41 to 43? Passage 1, okay, that's over here, right? Yeah. Okay, so when we adapt to a new cultural phenomenon, including the use of new medium, we end up with different brain. So this is something about, just change your brain whenever we do something new. Okay, let's look at what choices we have. So A, 51 to 53. Okay, what does that say? Critics of new media sometimes use science itself to press their case, blah, 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 blah. The reason I didn't really read on is because it's talking about critics of new media. The question asks for what the author of passage 2 thinks, not what the critics of new media think. So obviously A is wrong. Okay, 54 to 56. So it starts with yes. Yes. Every time we learn a fact or a skill, the wiring of the brain changes. Okay, I'll agree to this. I'll agree that this is similar to what Michael was trying to say, right? It's saying that every time we learn something new, which is something like adapt to a new cultural phenomenon that's interacting with something new, we change our brain, right? So the wiring changes, and also we end up with a different brain. So if the wire changes, then of course you have a different brain. That's common sense. Okay, so B is a pretty good reading statement, so I'm going to leave it open for now. There's definitely correlation between what author of passage 2 is saying here and also what Michael was saying. Okay, C, lines 57 to 59. 57 to 59, but the existence of neuroplasticity does not mean the brain is a blob of clay pounded into shape by experience. So here the author is trying to say that yeah, there is neuroplasticity. The brain does change, but the way that it's depicted by people like critics of new media is incorrect. It doesn't just get pounded on, and so here it's actually more of a contradiction more than anything of what Michael is trying to say, because Michael is saying, okay, we do something, our brain's completely different, man. And here the author is trying to say that's a false interpretation of neuroplasticity. Sure, the brain changes, but not to that extreme. Okay, and that's the difference between choice B and C. With choice B, it's a clear reading statement, clear agreement of how the brain could change. But part C is saying that yeah, the brain changes, but there's a qualification in that it's not how you think that it will change, not how Michael is depicting it to be changed. Okay, so that's what makes C incorrect. So D, last choice, 83 to 84. 83 to 84. Okay, media critics. Great. Not the author. Dunzo. So that's crossed out, and that leaves B to be the correct answer. Okay, very, very great. We finished now, finally. Quite a long test. But if you have any questions about any, answer choice and maybe why your choice is incorrect and you still need a little bit more convincing to analyze how it is incorrect, and maybe a bit more analysis on why the right answer is correct, please feel free to comment below. I welcome any questions. I'll try to get to them as fast as I can, and I just hope you keep practicing this and doing this on your own, because it definitely does help. Okay, and if you do find my tips about looking at subjectivity, looking at how analyzing the information in the passage and how that relates to picking out the correct answer and using it to eliminate wrong answers, if you find any improvements in your score and you feel like I contributed to that, well, feel free to subscribe and like. I would definitely appreciate that. Okay, so I'm gonna sign off now. Have a great day, guys, and I hope you get that 1600. Thank you.